Beth Harper, it is so wonderful to have you with us. I've known you these many years. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of waterfront you could cover, but I know you want to focus mostly today on the case for making more operational input into study designs, and how that might help things at the front end and the back end. So if you could, let's just talk about that as a broad topic and why that's still an issue today.
Sure. I've really been reflecting on my nearly 40 years now in the trenches of clinical research operations, Michael, wearing many hats and always really focused on enrollment and site performance optimization and really looking at some of the patterns and trends we've had in the industry. And a lot of it comes back to protocol complexity. And there's many reasons for that and root causes, symptoms, and potentially solutions. But it's really about this theme of what's driving protocol complexity that seems to be getting worse in the industry overall. So yeah, I think with that, would love to go in a couple different areas. What do you think will be most interesting?
Well, let's talk about, I know you want to talk about some Tufts data that reinforces some of this and really puts a spotlight on it. So if you could dive into that Tufts data, you set it up for us a little bit, but talk about, what you think that tells us and shows us.
Sure. So, we've been looking at this issue of protocol complexity, amendments, and deviations. And the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development is really, the leading authority on this. But I'll just call upon some of the most recent data, a couple, maybe 2001. They looked at patterns and trends again with amendments and what's causing amendments. And so a couple facts and figures, I won't regurgitate everything, but I think it will put some of the, conversation into the right context. So protocols are getting more complex for a number of reasons, regulatory reasons, focus on more rare diseases, immuno-oncology, adaptive study designs, and certainly decentralized trials. We're trying to, make things more participant-centric. So there's a number of reasons why, but sort of the result of this protocol complexity is that there are more and more amendments. So like 2/3 of studies have amendments. The number of amendments that are substantive are about 3.5 or so per phase 3 study. So every study starts experiencing more and more amendments. That leads to a lot of operational headaches at the site, stops and starts, resubmissions, having to relearn the protocol, avoiding mistakes. And I think the most interesting thing from the Tufts data is about 34% or a third of these amendments are avoidable. And so some of their data really
that's a staggering number. If you think about that in anything, if you tell me 1/3 of my errors are completely unnecessary, I mean, in tennis, you'd be wiped out in a second with that many unforced errors, right?
Well, exactly, Michael. And so, they really sort of came to the conclusion that, if people spent more time upfront planning, we could avoid these things. And what was causing it? The root causes were a lot of errors, inconsistencies. My experience is that people rush through. They want to get that final protocol, they push it through, and they'll deal with issues and errors after the fact with protocol clarification memos, with more amendments. But it just creates a trickle-down effect or an accumulation of worse and worse problems. And, the number of patients or participants that are having substantial deviations is higher, and that all just leads to poor quality outcomes. So I think the cumulative picture is that the protocol complexity is getting worse. So what can we do about it? Which I know is really the interest here is what
$64,000 question. I know if you could solve this with a magic wand, you'd be a rich woman. But yeah, I'd love to talk about your thoughts about solutions. What can we do about this? It's a group problem, so it's a group solution, of course.
Absolutely. So what can we do to reduce protocol complexity, simplify design? Sometimes we just don't have a choice. There's regulatory scientific reasons we can't. So let's kind of put that aside. But I think the key areas for me are getting operational input. And that is happening in a couple different ways. And what I mean by that is having the end users, the investigators, the study coordinators, the monitors or CRAs, take a look at that protocol to flag the things that don't make sense, that are inconsistent, that don't align with standard of care. And so having different lenses, because the studies are often designed by experts at the pharma companies, but sometimes we don't get that site input. So some sponsors are certainly doing that with operational advisory boards, sort of like a scientific advisory board, but they're getting feedback from sites. Some of them contract with their preferred site partners to get feedback. One thing I have observed, though, is sometimes I get the expert coordinators to give feedback, but it's really the lowest common denominator. It's that novice coordinator who's going to have to try and troubleshoot and figure this out. So that's an opportunity. So I think one area is organized input. The other area is to really try to map out the visualization of that study. Map out how is a patient going to flow through that study, the different cross-functional groups that are going to have to touch that protocol. And so mapping things out, and I've done a lot of, functional flow diagrams, day in the life of process flows that really help you see where there's a gap, where there's something that doesn't make sense. You can't get a participant from point A to B in 10 minutes and prepare the investigational product and have it administered, things of that nature. So I think that visualization really helps. And then I guess the third piece that I see sort of an interesting trend and have talked about this quite a bit is, do we create the operational aspects, the how-to pieces of the protocol in the protocol itself, or do we create a separate operations manual? And I think there's two sides of the camp, but if we're going to go down the path of the operations manual, what I see is that it's an afterthought, Michael. And so let's get that protocol done and then we'll figure this out. But if they can be done in parallel, we can work side by side to fix the issues in the protocol that may not align with the actual how is it actually going to be done. So I think those are some of the areas that I think we could really do a better job as an industry to address some of those key root cause issues with the protocol complexity problem.
So let's end on a positive note. I said wave a magic wand before. I think you said 34% of these errors, according to Tufts, are, I say unforced, thinking of tennis, but they're avoidable and probably pretty easily avoidable. What will be the benefit if we cut that in half?
Cycle time improvements, data quality improvements, less site and participant burden. So the holistic picture, everything is driven by that protocol. It is, the cornerstone to everything we do. So it has just a far-reaching effect on all aspects of study conduct and ultimately study outcomes.